Welcome to The Explainer. Today we are diving straight into a startling number coming out of the Department of Justice, and we're going to unpack exactly what is happening behind the scenes. We're looking at a massive institutional shift, so let's just get right into it.
30%. According to recent data detailed in our sources, financial fraud indictments coming out of DOJ headquarters and the U.S. Attorney's Office in Manhattan have plummeted by exactly that much, 30%, compared to their 10-year average. And to put that into perspective, white-collar defense lawyers are reporting that subpoenas to financial firms, the usual first step before an indictment even happens, they're basically just not happening right now. So it begs the question, why are 30% fewer financial fraud cases proceeding? Why is a department that historically charged tens of thousands of people a year suddenly stepping back from complex white-collar investigations? How does a major focus area just dry up? Well, to solve this mystery, the source documents suggest we really have to look at a fundamental rewiring of the department's entire purpose.
Our sources point to a massive philosophical shift. For decades, the post-Watergate norm meant both political parties generally agreed the DOJ should operate with institutional independence. Think of it as a guardian of the law, kept at a comfortable distance from the Oval Office. But now, the texts describe the current era under the Trump administration as a transformation. They say the department is becoming a muscular limb of the presidency, totally blurring the lines between policy, politics, and law enforcement.
And the source texts outline how this new directive actually plays out in practice. For instance, they detail how the DOJ is aggressively pursuing areas like healthcare fraud, specifically in states run by Democratic governors, like Gavin Newsom in California and Tim Walz in Minnesota. The sources argue this is a tactic to discredit political opponents. On the flip side, the text highlights sudden leniency for those who align with the administration's goals. We're talking about dropping a corruption case against former New York Mayor Eric Adams after he cooperated on immigration, or dropping fraud charges against Gautam Adani, a billionaire who promised massive U.S. investments.
Now, executing these radically new priorities obviously requires personnel, but the DOJ is facing an unprecedented mass attrition. It's wild. The department has lost a massive 20% of its lawyers overall. And in highly specialized areas, it's actually even worse. The counterintelligence section has seen a 40% drop in prosecutors, and the FBI has lost around 300 special agents dedicated to national security.
So why the sudden exodus? Well, as one former prosecutor bluntly noted about the mass departures from these complex units, these people have job options. The sources indicate that highly trained lawyers, the ones with decades of experience needed to untangle cyber warfare or counterterrorism plots, they're simply leaving. They're heading for better paying options in the private sector, and often citing a total clash between the new political agenda and the fair application of the law.
To try and stop the bleeding and fill these highly specialized empty desks, the department is actively lowering its hiring standards. They're actually bringing in recruits straight out of law school and handing them massive $25,000 signing bonuses. They are practically throwing money at new grads just to keep the lights on in these divisions. The texts give us a really stark example of what's driving this brain drain. During a major immigration crackdown in Chicago dubbed Operation Midway Blitz, prosecutors were reportedly told to go big and go loud. Every single unit, even the folks focused on cybercrimes, got dragged into it. The intense pressure from the front office to indiscriminately file charges against protesters was so severe that it completely upended normal legal procedures. And the result? Every single serving criminal section chief in that office just up and quit.
So the crucial point here is figuring out where the remaining limited resources are actually going. And the data shows that by September, a full 20%, literally 1/5 of the FBI's roughly 14,000 agents, were diverted completely away from their normal duties and reassigned specifically to immigration enforcement. On top of that, 260 FBI analysts were suddenly dispatched to pore over records in Georgia to investigate the 2020 election based on the president's claims. This massive reallocation of manpower happened right while the DOJ's dedicated election crimes unit was practically shut down and mandatory election year training for agents was just canceled. And this massive reallocation actually solves our initial mystery. With a shrunken workforce and surviving resources flooding heavily into priorities like immigration sweeps and election investigations, other divisions are just left to starve. Sections handling cryptocurrency fraud and public corruption have totally withered. Which brings us right back to our core question. It explains exactly why complex financial fraud cases have dropped by 30%. There is literally just no one left to investigate them.
But this massive pivot isn't just changing what gets prosecuted. It's creating severe ripple effects across the entire legal system. For example, mass detention immigration policies have caused a staggering backlog of 61,000 immigrant petitions. Plus, the sources point out that in just the first 14 months of this term, there were nearly 100 instances where the DOJ supplied inaccurate information to judges and nearly 800 instances of noncompliance with court orders in habeas cases.
Driven by this front office pressure, things are even veering into the absurd. Take the Broadview 6 case in Chicago, where prosecutors charged Democratic activists with conspiring to impede a federal agent. During a secret grand jury, prosecutors actually went so far as to dismiss skeptical jurors who dared to call the case a crock, before quietly dropping the charges entirely a few months later. You can probably guess that this kind of erratic behavior has led to massive judicial pushback. For decades, government lawyers always enjoyed the benefit of the doubt in courtrooms. Well, not anymore. As the federal judge overseeing that Broadview 6 case explicitly stated on the record, that trust has been broken. Judges are now increasingly demanding depositions and even threatening sanctions just to verify that the government's claims are actually true. Because of this broken trust, we're seeing courts having to step up as real-time guardrails. On July 7th, a federal judge outright blocked an overly broad DOJ subpoena for the names of Georgia election workers, calling it an unallowed fishing expedition. Then, less than a week later, on July 13th, another judge actually nullified a DOJ-organized tax audit settlement designed to protect the president. The courts are actively having to check the department's impulses. However, our sources warn that this problem is way bigger than just a few thrown-out subpoenas. What we are really looking at here is deep institutional damage, a lasting degradation of professional norms. The texts argue that even if a future administration wants to restore the DOJ to its independent post-Watergate norms, doing so will be incredibly difficult. Ejecting these newly appointed partisan lawyers will almost inevitably be viewed by critics as a retaliatory witch hunt, and that just justifies the next purge, creating this vicious partisan cycle. Which leaves us with this final, vital question to ponder. With highly trained legal professionals now hesitating to join what they see as a deeply politicized department, and with the core trust of the judicial branch broken, once the independence of the justice system is fractured, can it ever truly be rebuilt? Or is that 30% drop in complex fraud enforcement really just the first symptom of a permanent change? Thank you for joining us for this explainer. Keep questioning the data, and we'll see you next time.